Harvard Heights has a fantastic collection of these massive, mostly two-story craftsman homes that were built in the first decade of the 20th century. Now, I want you to think about this for a little bit. You've got a development, and what do you do? How do you class up the joint, as it were? Often you see these developments advertised. They've got names like Shady Brook Pines or Lonesome Lake Bluff or something like that. And when you see a name like that, the place is probably a sun-baked hellhole. You know what I'm saying? But Harvard Heights, well, they imagine go all the way back to 1904 or something, 1902. They tried to do something similar. Let's class up. Let's make it a little more posh. Class up the joint by naming the streets after famous universities. So you've got Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard, right? Harvard Heights. They try to class up the joint, but they went a little bit farther than just naming. They when the area was developed, when the neighborhood was developed, it was put into the deed that if you wanted to build here, so close to downtown, I picture like a billboard by the streetcar, right? It's on the streetcar billboard. You go by the Pacific Electric and it says, if you lived here, you'd be home by now. So you want to live near close to downtown, that's great. But to live here in exclusive Harvard Heights, you've got to spend at least $2,500 on your home, which in 1902, 1904, that's a lot of money. So what we get in Harvard Heights are these not just massive, your 5,000 square foot, your two-story, not these massive dwellings, but in order to get up and beyond that $2,500 range, you've got the insides that are full of things like stained glass and fine details. Look at the amazing fireplace at Steve Wallace's house, for instance, or that 8-foot by 8-foot stained glass in the Wilson house. And so Harvard Heights is full of this kind of stuff. Massive, single family homes? Well, I don't know about that. You want to think about at that time, early 1900s, the U.S. was still in that multi-generational vibe, which most of human history, families living together. It's got to be multi-generational, right? While the grandmothers, the grandfathers help out with the child rearing, help the mother out while the father's doing this and that. So you see that multi-generational thing, and so you have to have the large houses with the many rooms and maybe a room for the butler or the maid. But then what happened? Well, after World War II, you've got this huge push for a variety of reasons. Helps industry and commerce, right? A big push for the nuclear family where everybody can have their own home. You don't need to have the in-laws there, and everybody can have their own car, and everybody can have their own washing machine. So you can see this huge push by industry in order to sell goods for that idea of the nuclear family. And of course, that dovetailed perfectly with propaganda for the Cold War that said, the U.S. system or the capitalist system can produce all these consumer goods and can give you so much space as opposed to the horrible repressive socialist or communist regime. So you can see the intersection there of agendas. But what do we have happening now? So now you've got a younger generation. We're in the post-2008 arena, and the incomes have gone down, job availability, and jobs themselves disappeared for I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it, millennials, for the younger generation. So what do you do? Well, in Harvard Heights, you've got the solution where lots of younger folk can move in together, so you can have, if not different generations of a family, ad hoc or composite family of younger people coming together and to occupy the various homes. Large homes you see in Harvard Heights. This was the first area I lived in West Adams, and I lived in a communal house, had a dozen people in one of these massive homes, right? And it makes a lot of sense because when you think about it now, why does every single family need to have their own washing machine? That doesn't make sense. You don't need all this stuff. Why does every single person need to have a car? And of course, it's a cliche now that, the millennials, they don't want cars. Well, they'd rather have smartphones. Well, that makes sense if you think about what the car represented and how the car was sold as a place for, well, of course, for nookie. When you go out, you can go out and park somewhere, but also as a means of communication and freedom. And of course, you can get these now with apps. Or you can communicate with apps on your smartphone. So in the place that I lived at, the folks, rather than having a car, all had smartphones, and they had bikes. And so you could bike everywhere in LA, and we could all share common stuff like washing machines, what have you. And the block I lived on had several of these communal homes, or at least 4 or 5 homes with names like Synchronicity or the HMS Possibility. And sure, it's easy to poke fun at names like that. It makes one think, well, these folks must be naive. You had this image that was put about in popular culture, starting with films like Easy Rider, in which the naive hippies were living in a communal existence. It may seem naive, but it certainly seems to fit with a lot of requirements now in terms of how to live with reduced, very little income and still live a rich, full, connected life. And certainly on the block that I lived in, there were communal meals between the different houses where everybody could contribute monies, and you could have dinner every single night made by a different person in one of the different houses. So it's a really interesting example of the repurposing of these homes, and maybe to get them back to closer to their original intent. Ooh, speaking of food, the communal dining reminds me of food. I did want to include a shot of one of the little small eateries that they have in Harvard Heights. You see the little pupusa stand, Salvadoran food. And this again, I went on a bit about the hot dog situation in Victoria Park with that TV show. But we have such a wide variety of food here. At the very least I could do is include a photograph of a local eatery. And these are all over the place. You'll see these pop up all over LA and certainly all over West Adams, where you'll have, these little storefronts, or all a little off to the side, almost an alleyway, but with a little covering hammered over it. You'll have different types of food, different types of stands that have all sorts of cuisine. In this case, in the photo that you see here, in this chapter, it's Salvadoran. I want to end on one thing. There's several photographs in this house. You see Steve Wallace working to restore one of the homes that he's purchased, and there's another photo of a house, 3 photos of a house that's being worked on, renovated. That's the one with that fantastic chimney, right? And you think about all the work that's being put into these homes, and you realize with so many of these folks, look at the last house that you see, the extraordinary last house in this chapter, that beautiful wallpaper. To live in these homes, for many of these folks, it's not just a temporary way stop. It's not just a place that you're just trying to make habitable and kind of nice. There are people that do devote their lives. This is when they're not necessarily their working lives, but their hobby, their extracurricular activities, as it were, are devoted to their homes. So in the home, a couple of the homes that you'll see, the one with the beautiful wallpaper, the couple that lives there has spent every weekend on that home, restoring that home for years and years and years. And that's a very common story here in Harvard Heights. People not just love their home, but they treasure it. The home itself becomes the object of art, an object of fascination, and a project to work with and to live within, which I think is really far out. To live within an artwork, and especially in Harvard Heights, where there's so much beautiful craftsmen. I use that in the word craftsman in multiple ways, right? So much beautiful work. You live inside a work of art. You treasure it. You take care of it. And you restore it. Is a kind of a fabulous way to live.